Hey folks, welcome back. I'm going to do something a bit different today. So, in the past, I've sort of alluded to the fact that I have lots of other hobbies besides twisty puzzles. And today I wanted to talk about actually my favorite game in the world, which is Starfleet Battles, which you can see in front of you. Now, alongside my playing around with puzzles, playing board games is one of my big hobbies. And in particular, I like sort of one on one war game style games. And zooming in even further, I like sci-fi tactical games. And Starfleet Battles is kind of one of the OG sci-fi tactical games. And it's based on the original series of Star Trek. As you can kind of see, a very Enterprise-looking ship here. And it's been around for over 40 years now. So very few games have that kind of longevity. But Starfleet Battles still is around, and apparently in the last few years has been gaining more and more players, which is great. They have an official tournament system, which is played every year, I think, at the Origins Game Fair, which is very competitive. So it's a very healthy game with an absolute ton of content. But strangely, there's not a lot of decent videos about it on YouTube. So I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about the game, show you the basic set here, and give you some recommendations about how to get started in the game. Just to say up front, this is a complicated game. It's notoriously complicated, in fact, but it's not as bad as it looks. If you're really into the subject matter, if you really want to feel like you're captain of a starship in a Star Trek-inspired world, you can't get any better than this. Now, there is a less complicated sibling of this game called Federation Commander, which is also fantastic, and I also own a lot for that game as well, so I'll do a video about that in the future also. But basically, even though this might not be to everyone's taste, I really wanted to just put something out there about this game, which I think has been such a big part of the kind of wargamey part of the board game world for such a long time, and it deserves some attention. And I wanted to kind of promote it a little bit, just to hopefully inspire some of you to try it, because I think it's great. Anyway, without further ado, I'll talk to you a little bit about this basic set here. So if you want to get into Starfleet Battles, if you're curious about it, this is the place to begin. As implied by the basic set title up there. So this includes all you need for essentially years of gaming. Like, you don't have to buy any of this other stuff here if you don't want to, and you can still get an absolute ton of value out of this. And the reason for that is, I mean, we got a lot of content in here. So you can see there's a nice image of starships blowing each other up, which is pretty much what you do in the game, so very representative. And you can see the components here. We have a 238-page captain's rulebook, and that's the basic set, mind you. The full-size rulebook for the game, which you can buy all in one as the master rulebook for Starfleet Battles, is about 460 pages long. But the rulebook contains every possible scenario. So for every weapon, there will be extra paragraphs detailing what happens in every possible onboard situation, because over 40 years, they figured it all out. So the great thing about it is you will never have an unanswerable rules question. Somebody will have an answer for you, either in the rulebook or on the official forums. It's an extremely well thought out and detailed set of rules, but that does mean it's big. But a lot of that is these kind of exceptions to the rules and clarifying interactions and stuff. So don't be intimidated by that 238 pages, and I'll show you how it looks in a minute. Then you have a 48-page SSD book. SSDs are ship system displays, which I'll talk about shortly. You have a starter pack of 16 pages, which has all the charts and tables you need to play. There's your full color map, 280 counters, 2 dice, and then some 8.5 by 11 cards with the most important tables in the game system, which is damage allocation, movement, and energy allocation. So there's a lot in this box, and I got this recently because I've owned this game system for a number of years, but through a few mishaps when moving to various places around the world, I've lost my collection, or at least parts of it. So I decided to rebuy the core bits, because a lot of the rule books have been updated actually since I bought these. So a lot of what you see here is actually bought very recently, because I updated almost my entire collection. And that shows you how much I love the game, because I thought I'd just pick up a few things, ended up rebuying the entire system just so I'd be fully up to date. So I don't do that for other games. Now if we open it up here, you can see now the company that makes this is called Amarillo Design Bureau. You can see their logo down here. They're based in Amarillo, Texas. Used to be Task Force Games that made this back in the kind of 70s and 80s when it first came out. They're known as ADB for short. Honestly, they're still a little bit kind of stuck in the past in some ways, particularly when it comes to PDF products, but they're incredibly passionate about this game system. They do everything in their power to keep the company afloat. They're really good at taking player input, like a lot of the products that you see here were extensively worked on by fans who were given design credits and stuff like that, which is really great. So they have a very diehard community. So yeah, ADB does not have a great deal of budget, but with what they have, they produce a lot of good quality content in every box. I bought this for, it was about £33, I think. But like I said, you can get many years of gaming out of just this one box. So, what do we get inside? Well, we have our basic set counter sheet, first of all. So these counters will represent your spaceships on the game map. The game map you will see just below here. It's a hexagonal map. So we have, in blue, we have ships from the Federation of Planets, which those of you who know Star Trek will be familiar with. And you'll see each ship has a little designation, like an abbreviation that tells you what kind of ship it is. So we have cruisers, we have drones, which are missiles, we have shuttles here, we have light cruisers, CLs here, we have more drones, we've got scouts, we've got tugs, which are kind of transports, we've got destroyers, we've got cargo pods, we've got all kinds of stuff here. Then we have Orion Pirates, which you will also remember from the original series. These ships are really cool. They have a built-in stealth capacity, which helps them make, kind of slip through defenses, and they're harder to hit. They also have weapon mounts that can be swapped out, so they can kind of steal weapons from other empires and use them. Then we have the Kizunti. If you've not heard of these before, despite being a Star Trek fan, I don't blame you. But they were actually a race of aliens created by the author Larry Niven, and they appeared in Star Trek: The Animated Series, which is also included in the license that ADB has for the Starfleet Battle System to use Star Trek content. You'll notice that we have some Kizunti ships here. We have, first of all, some freighters, shuttles, more drones. Then we have various cruisers here, light cruisers as well. We have battle cruisers, some fighters, and then a whole load more drones. And there's a reason for that. The Kizunti in this game are specialized in firing missiles and using seeking weapons. So you'll need a lot of those counters when you're playing Kizunti ships. Then we have the Gorn. These are the kind of dinosaur-looking dudes from the original series, if you remember those. We've seen Kirk fistfight one or two in his day. Then we have some battle cruisers, regular cruisers, light cruisers, some destroyers. And then we have plasma torpedoes. If you're familiar with the original series, the Romulans back in the 60s era of Star Trek used plasma torpedo weapons, and the Gorn have those as well. Then up here we have the infamous Klingons. Of course, the Klingons use disruptors in this game, just like in the show. And here we have some iconic Klingon cruisers, which we might know as the birds of prey. We've got some frigates, shuttles, more drones. Then we have some cool terrain features that can go on the map. So we've got gas giants, various types of planets, asteroids, comets, whatnot. Then we have another famous adversary for the Federation, the Romulans. So we have WE, I think is War Eagle. Got Warbirds here. They use some Klingon ship hulls that they bought as well. Then more plasma torpedoes, which is very characteristic of the Romulans. And of course, the Romulans, like in the show, they can cloak, which has very interesting effects in this game. Then we have these web counters, which come up when you're using the Tholians. You may remember the famous episode of Star Trek called the Tholian Web, where they weave webs of kind of force fields that trap the Enterprise. And you can do that in this game. Then down below here, we have some extra shuttles, we have some more plasma torpedoes, and then we have some monsters, space monsters, like a space amoeba, planet killer, all this kind of stuff, and some star bases. Those are really cool for the scenarios that you can play. So the great thing about Starfleet Battles is the huge range of different scenarios. You can, of course, just, each ship is assigned a point value for how strong it is, and you can just set up a duel between two players, pick your empires, and get equal point values on the board and fight it out. But the scenarios are really cool because they give different sides different objectives. So, for example, you might play a single-player scenario against these space monsters and try to gather information through your sensors, work out how to defeat them. There are little tables you can roll on to tell you, in this instance, what's the weakness of the monster, how do you defeat it. Then you can have base defense scenarios, which are really good fun. One player will be defending their star base, the other one will be trying to destroy it. There's loads of cool stuff. There's rescue missions where one side has prisoners of war on a planet and the other side is trying to break them free. It really adds a lot of atmosphere and fun to the game. And there's an absolutely insane number of scenarios available in every Starfleet Battles product, so you never run out of stuff to do. So that is the counter set you get in the basic game. You can see there's a ton of ships already. Lots of stuff to do, and they give you all the extras you need to make sure you have enough plasma torpedoes on the board when you need them, and missiles and terrain features and so on. So really comprehensive, great way to get into the game. Then we have our space map. As you'd expect, it's a map that looks like outer space. I think it's a Hubble image on the background there. You can see some distant galaxies and stuff. It's nothing super special, but it's a nice quality cardstock. Folds up really well. It'll last you a long time, and it has some little... sometimes you need to roll for a random direction, so this shows you which direction is assigned to which face of the die that you roll. So very functional. Then we have the gigantic rulebook. Look at how thick that is. Very impressive stuff. Now, this basic rulebook also includes basic game rules in it, so if you just read that part of the rulebook, you'll be able to kind of jump in and see how things work. But you'll see that it's written in quite dense text. Everything's broken down into kind of subsections and subsections and subsections, which makes the rules easy to reference once you kind of get to grips with it. And as with a lot of games like this, most important thing is to start with the sequence of play. So in this game, you start out by energy allocation. So every ship generates power from its warp engines, and you use that energy to power all your different systems, including your weapons, and you determine with your available energy how fast you want to move. And the faster you want to move, the more energy you have to spend. And the very unique part of this game is the way that movement works, which I'll talk about when we get to the charts and tables and stuff. So you start out, you allocate all your energy, and once you've done that at the beginning of your turn, you're kind of stuck with it. You can't rearrange things once the turn starts and you start fighting and moving around, which is great because you have to think strategically from the beginning. Like, you have to think about, what do I need my energy to do? How fast do I think my enemy's going to go? Where might they go? What weapon should I prepare? Should I do things like reinforce my shields or repair systems or do other tasks that might need energy to be pumped into them? So once you allocate your energy, then you work out each player's speed. If a ship needs to blow up, then it'll happen in the self-destruction phase. Then you can use your sensors to lock on to the enemy. Then you have an initial activity phase, which is where you do kind of preliminary stuff before you get into the actual moving and fighting. Then you have the impulse procedure. And the impulse system is what really makes this game sing as far as the tactics are concerned. So, well, actually, you know what? Let's just go right to that. If I find the... where are the charts here? Should be here somewhere. We've got lots of energy allocation forms. That's helpful. It's not what I'm looking for, though. Then we have the SSDs. Okay. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so I'll talk about energy allocation first, so it makes a little bit more sense. So this is your tax form. Basically, at the beginning of your turn, you grab a copy of this, and you fill out what your energy usage is going to be for all the different parts of your ship. So first you work out how much warp engine power you have, which will be variable because some of your warp engine power can be destroyed as you're fighting. Same with your impulse engines. You might have other reactor sources of power, and you put down how much you have available here. You might also have batteries that allow you to store energy from previous turns, so you can add it to your repertoire in the next turn. Then you need to pay for things like life support, fire control, which is controlling your weapons. You want to charge your phasers. You got to pay if you want to use heavy weapons or special sensors or other stuff. Then you make sure your shields are turned on. If you want to reinforce your shields, you need to pay for that. And you need to pay according to how much you want to reinforce them. Then you pay for your movement. Then you pay for special maneuvers, which is a higher energy turn. If you want to do emergency maneuvers or emergency stops, you need to pay for that as well. Then you need energy for damage control. If you want to recharge stuff, if you want to use a tractor beam, if you want to transport people around, then you have electronic countermeasures, electronic countermeasures. Your labs are what you use to scan things like space monsters or figure out what kind of missiles people are firing at you, stuff like that. Wild weasels are a way to fool enemy missiles and lock onto the wrong target. Suicide shuttles, you can charge up a shuttlecraft with antimatter bombs and fire it out unmanned, and it will seek out the enemy and blow up in a big explosion. You can also pay for your cloaking device. So after you pay for all that stuff, you work out how much power you've used and how much you have left, and then you're ready to go for your turn. And it's when you first see it, it's really daunting. You think, God, that's a lot of stuff to manage for every ship. And it is, but within this is a huge amount of richness. There's lots of really cool stuff you can do to plan out your turn, to respond cleverly to your opponent, to outthink them, basically. So once you get into it, it's really good fun. So the movement is really key in this game. So here we have the impulse movement chart, right? Now you'll see across the top is your speed, okay? And it goes from 2 to 32, okay? Then you have the impulses down the bottom. And what this chart shows you is, so at the beginning of the turn, every ship will pay a different amount for a given amount of speed from their warp energy, okay? So let's say my ship is really fast, and I decide I want to go speed 27, okay? So speed 27, and then during a turn is actually split up into 32 impulses, which go all the way down here, okay? And at the beginning of each impulse, depending on your speed, you might be able to move in that impulse or not. So if you're moving at a higher speed, you move more often. So if we go 27, you'll see that we have numbers here going through quite a lot of these impulses on the left. So we're moving almost every impulse, right? So we're going 27. If we're going something like 8, then we only go sporadically during the turn. So impulses happen kind of simultaneously. Like if my opponent and I are both going 27, then when each impulse comes up, we move at the same time, and then we decide if we're going to shoot and stuff like that. Whereas if another ship is on the board and they're moving slower, they'll only come up when their chart says they should move on that impulse. And what that means is that you have a fully turn-based system, right? But it allows this really granular representation of speed. And it really makes clear the difference in what you can do depending on what your speed you're moving. And as your speed changes, it also affects things like how often you can turn your ship, right? The faster you're going, the longer you need to go before you can make a turn because you've got kind of momentum built up. So this chart here is really central to the game system and gives it this, it's a game of maneuver, basically. So you really need to master and understand the impulse chart as you get into the game and try to become better at it. And one thing I want to emphasize with Starfleet Battles is that it really is, player skill is central to this game. The people that win the tournaments are incredible, and you'll lose to them every time. I've never faced one, but I've seen and read commentary about tournament games, and I mean, they came up with ideas that are just insane. So even though there's randomness with your dice for damage and stuff, if you're better at the game, you will win. It's highly skill-based, and I love that about it. So that's the impulse chart. Really great, creative way of representing different speeds in a turn-based system. It's very cool. Then we have, this is just record keeping form, so when you fire a missile, you'll log it in the seeking weapon records. If you drop some mines, you can note their location secretly, so your opponent doesn't know, but if you're playing in a competitive battle, somebody might need to double check that you weren't lying, then you'll have a record here. Major events in the turn you can mark here. Guard assignment. So one of the things you can do in this game, you can, when you knock a shield down on your opponent, you can send over Marines to invade the other ship and blow stuff up. But in order to guard against that, you can assign guard teams. You have a limited number of Marines on your ship. You can assign them to different parts of the ship to guard it. So you can really see there's so much detail here. Then we've got the wild weasels and stuff that I mentioned before. And logging boarding parties, which is if you knock shields down, you invade the other ship, you can try to actually capture it by sending over boarding parties. And there's a whole combat system for that. And the other thing that really makes this game special is the DAC, the damage allocation chart. Okay, so every time you shoot a weapon at somebody and you score some damage that goes through the shields, or you know there's no shields there at all, and you just hit the hull, you roll on this chart. Okay, and the chart is very carefully designed and play tested over all the years this game has existed, so that there's loads of intricacy here, right? Even though again there's variability depending on what you roll on the DAC, but you'll notice as you get to know the ships that different systems appear different amounts on different lines of this chart. And it's all worked out so that different weapons from different distances will tend to, statistically, land you in certain parts of the chart. And different types of ships will have advantages depending on their structure that will put them in a better position when it comes to rolling on the chart. So when you roll on the chart, whatever you come up with is crossed off your little ship diagram and is destroyed. So if you hit a drone, then your drone launcher is blown up. If you hit the bridge is blown up. If you hit the phaser, then that phaser's gone. And you can repair stuff bit by bit. But as you get into battle, your ship starts getting shredded. You start losing warp power because you don't lose your boxes of warp energy on your ship. You don't have enough phasers to fire back, and you get this degradation of combat ability. So it's really cool. And again, the ships are so detailed. So you really, to get good at the game, you really become intricately familiar with this chart, how it relates to the ships that you like to fly, and then that informs your whole strategy, how you distribute your energy, what speeds you want to fly in different situations. I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff you can learn as you get good at this game. So to make things a little bit more clear, I should probably show you some ship diagrams. So the ship system displays are in this book, in the basic set. There's 48 of them, I believe, in the basic set, which again, I mean, if you just play some duels and stuff, I mean, you can get many, many, many weeks of gaming out of this with different matchups and different scenarios, loads and loads of good things. So in the shipbook, we have our general units. These are things like the star bases, Q ships and freighters that can be used by any side. They're kind of generic units. Then we have our specific Federation stuff, which includes some utility things like the tug and storage pods, and then big powerhouses like the Dreadnought. Same again for the Klingons. We've got a little bit less on the Romulan side. Then we have a bunch of Kizunti ships, 5 Gorns, a couple Tholians, and an Orion ship. And then let's take a look at not one of the generic ships. Get something more exciting. Yeah, here we go. Federation Dreadnought. All right. So this is what a ship diagram looks like in Starfleet battles. Okay, there's a lot here. That much is clear. Okay. So first of all, you have, of course, the name of the ship, the year in service. So the Starfleet Battles game system has its own history, kind of branching off from original Star Trek, and there's all these huge amount of detail with that. So if you care about the history of the game, you'll need to pay attention to when this ship actually was available to fly, and make sure that you're playing against other ships that were available at that time in the history where you're playing a scenario. Then you have the ship diagram itself. So we have the shields around the sides and the front and the back. So each of these maps to one of the sides of a hex that the ship will be flying in. And depending on where you get hit from will determine which shield gets knocked down. And as you knock through the shields, then you get to the ship systems. And that's where that damage allocation chart comes in, which I mentioned before. Once you're through the shields and you get a hit from weapons on the ship, you roll on that chart to see what gets blown up. You cross it off on here. And if we zoom in a little bit, you can see there's tons of different systems in here. So up front we have photons. The FA refers to the firing arc. So it's a forward firing arc. We have a couple of batteries to store energy. We have lots of labs to check out anomalies and to gather intelligence about enemy ships. We've got phaser ones, which are the strongest phasers. We've got transporters. We've got the bridge where the captain sits. We've got some optional boxes here can turn into different stuff. We've got forward hull, the flag bridge, the emergency bridge, impulse engines, more batteries. Then we have 6 shuttle boxes, so you can launch some shuttles from the ship or use them as wild weasels or suicide shuttles. We've got some tractor beams, which are really good when you get close in fighting in some situations. We've got some more hull boxes. We've got probe, which again you can use to gather intelligence. Here we have a handy phaser with a 360-degree firing arc, which is very helpful. And here's your all-important warp engines. Now, most of your energy for your turn that you're going to put into the form and budget out all your actions is going to come from these warp engine boxes. Down on the bottom, you have the warp energy movement cost chart, which is really handy to have. It tells you for a given speed how much energy you want to spend in order to pay for that speed. So you can see once you get up to 30, I mean, you're using basically all your juice. So you don't necessarily want to go that far. You need to budget carefully your movement versus your need to fire weapons and so on. Then there's a cost for high energy turns and a cost to go into erratic maneuvers, which is when if you're under fire and you're running away, erratic maneuvers will help you kind of evade shots from the enemy. Then conveniently, the SSDs also include all the information you need to fire your weapons and to use your crew units, boarding parties, and all that. So here we can see the ship can carry 6 administrative shuttlecraft, which were marked by those 6 boxes here. So here we can keep track of them, what their ID is on the counter, how many hit points they got left, if there's any special task we've assigned them. We've got transporter bombs, which you can chuck out into space behind you to blow up pursuers and stuff like that. Then these are your crew units. The little star marks if you get a lot of your crew massacred, you get down to here, then you're basically out of control, can't do anything. Then you've got your boarding parties, which you can use to invade. You got probes you can fire. Then you have your weapons here. So this is how your photon torpedoes work. Photon torpedoes have to be paid for over 2 turns, and on the second turn they can fire, but you can also add extra juice, extra energy to overload them, which increases the power of the torpedo. And there's a lot of intricacy about when to hold your torpedoes, when to fire them, when the overloads are most effective and stuff like that. And whenever you fire a weapon, it's the same basic procedure. You check the range and whether it's a standard shot or an overloaded shot or any other kind of special shot. You roll your dice, and then you reference the table. So here, photon torpedoes have a to hit roll. So if I'm 2 hexes away, I need to roll between 1 and 5 on a d6, and that'll hit. And then I can do the damage that's marked here, or an overloaded shot damage. Similar with the phasers here. So the phaser 1 is the strongest phaser that you find on a starship. And you can see that the numbers clearly decrease as your range increases. So once we get out to 50 hexes, it's really hard to do much except scratch an enemy. But up close, that's 9 or 8 points is quite a lot. You can blow up a lot of systems with that. And Type 3 phasers, you have a lot of those. You also have those on your shuttlecraft and other small craft. They're much weaker. Biggest damage is 4, but that's enough to blow up things like enemy missiles or take down other shuttlecraft and stuff like that. Then finally, you have your turn modes. So depending on your speed, you have a different turn mode, and that tells you how many hexes you need to travel before you can make a turn. So as you can see, the faster you're going, your turn gets slower and slower. And the Federation is known for being a bit like giant cruise ships in space. They turn quite poorly. So actually, let's check it against something more nimble, like a Klingon. See what we got here. Okay. Yeah, here's a big chunky Klingon Dreadnought. So here you can see we've got a different weapon set up. We've got anti-drones to blow up enemy missiles. We've got our own drone racks, which fire missiles. We've got Type 1 phasers again. And then we have disruptors, which are the Klingons' heavy weapon. They can be overloaded as well and do twice as much damage, but it reduces the range and uses more power. So there's a balance to be struck there. Now, does this have a turn mode chart on it? I imagine it must do. Oh, yeah, there we go. Just couldn't see it. So here you can see that actually the maximum turn mode here is 6, where it was 7 on the Federation. So it doesn't sound like much of a difference, but in a firefight, that can make all the difference. So even at a fast speed, and this is a big chunky ship, you can turn much better than the Federation. So each ship has so much personality to it. Like, you can see already just the basic differences between this ship and the other. It's a completely different beast to fly it. I mean, suddenly we have seeking weapons instead of photon torpedoes. We have disruptors that do totally different stuff. We have, this faster turn mode. We've got different movement costs. We've got a different placement type of systems available. I mean, and that's just 2 ships, and there are well over 2,000 ships, I believe, in the game system at this point. And every one of them has this level of detail. So yeah, I mean, there's really just an insane amount of richness in this game. Now, you'll see, of course, it's not exactly a looker. Aesthetically, these ship diagrams are quite old school. Federation Commander, the sister game, is quite a bit better in that respect. It's got dry erasable ship cards in color, and you'll see those in my next video on this. But and you also have to either buy the PDFs for these separately to print them out, or to do photocopies. So that you can mark up these sheets, of course. But I don't mind all that. I mean, the prep actually is kind of cool because it forces you to think about what ships you're going to choose. It kind of inspires you to look at these sheets and really work out what's going on. Like, you look at this and you say, okay, this is a carrier. So what does that mean? It's got lots of fighters that can launch and shoot missiles themselves, but then its own weapons are limited. So, if I'm fighting a fleet action, I'll need to get stronger ships to escort the carrier and protect it. And, as you get to know the ship sheets and print them out and look at them, you'll really get a sense for just what you can do in this game. I mean, it's really, there's just so much variety, and I really love the detail of it. So yeah, that's kind of a little peek at the basic set. I'm not going to show you everything because I think it's more fun if you discover these things for yourself to some degree. But yeah, I mean, it's the price is absolutely reasonable in this game. They really give you a ton of content just in the starter pack here. There's also this little starter folder, which kind of gives you what you need to fight from the basic rules that are in the rulebook. So you can kind of use this right off the bat and start getting to grips with how you move around, assigning energy, dealing with the impulse charts, damage allocation, all that. Everything you need is in here. You can just kind of rip this folder apart and start fighting, which is pretty cool. And yeah, I mean, the rule book is a chunky one. There's a lot going on in here, but they do a good job of telling you what you need to know to start with. You start with the basic rules, and there's a kind of some tips in the beginning of the rule book about, how to extend beyond that. So it's not as bad as it looks, and really, once you get the basics of the game down, using the damage allocation chart, how you work with impulse movement, and dealing with energy allocation, the rest starts to come really naturally because everything is built on that skeleton. All the game's weapons function in a pretty similar way on a basic level, and as you introduce new scenarios and new ideas in the game bit by bit, you can easily keep from overwhelming yourself. So definitely don't be scared off by the rulebook. It's a fantastic game. Definitely a modern classic in my opinion, and the variety is endless. Just you can play this for years, as many people have, and really seek to get good at it. And in recent years, they have made a lot of efforts on the aesthetics. So these counters in the older products, they did not have these colorful images. They were just like monochrome outlines, and some of the products still have that, but since the kind of mid-2000s, they've really beefed up the look of the counters, which are really nice now, really high-quality stuff. They also have more counters per sheet. Used to be, I want to say, 216 counters per sheet. Now it's 280, which means you have a lot more counters for your utility, like these drones and stuff. So it's actually become a better value over the years rather than worse, which is pretty amazing. So yeah, that's the basic set. Okay, now I say basic, but there's clearly a huge amount of content, lots and lots of stuff you can do. So let's say you get the basic set and you think, wow, this is amazing. I'm inspired. I love Star Trek, whatever. I want to get deep into this now. So there's a few places you can go after this, and what I wanted to do was kind of help you to figure out how the game system works in terms of the product lineup, because I think for some people it's a little bit confusing initially. There are a lot of modules for the game. It's obvious that you start with the basic set, but the other parts can be a bit confusing. So first off, I would say you want to get advanced missions. This here, okay? This is the next big step up from the basic rules. This includes a ton of more options. So, and they describe it to you on the back here. So new rules expand the game system and add rich detail. So you can make mid-turn speed changes during your turns, which adds a decent amount of rules complexity, but gives you a lot more tactical flexibility. You have new rules for combat, like catastrophic damage, gathering intelligence on enemy ships, surprise, and different types of fire control. You have new drones types. You have Mauler ships, which gather their energy into massive blasts that sweep across the map. Rapid fire plasma torpedoes. You have new ship systems like advanced AI supercomputers that give you some benefits. You can drop mines. You can actually have detail in terms of your crew. You can buy legendary officers for your crew that give you benefits in certain types of actions. And there's over 100 ships in this box. So again, it's an amazing value. And then there's also cool new stuff for scenarios. So here they list a few things. I mean, basically, there's some new monsters to fight in those scenarios. You also have some new terrain features that get used in a lot of other scenarios. And this includes the advanced rulebook, which is another 160 pages to add to your gigantic 248-page rulebook from the basic set. Here we have another bunch of counters and 144 pages of ship system displays. So just a huge amount of stuff. And we'll look here briefly at the cover. It's kind of a zoomed in view of the image on the back there. We've got, I believe this is a Klingon battleship fending off. We've got Romulans here. There's some more Klingon compatriots in the back. We've got Federation coming in. There's all sorts of stuff going on. Yeah, so I'll try and be a bit quicker at looking through these other things. Okay, so now we have advanced missions. What do we get in here? Yeah, okay, so this set does not have updated counters yet, but I think that will happen at some stage. Oops, they're upside down as well. So these older counter sheets, you can see they have just a simple outline of the ship. They're still perfectly functional. All the information you need is here. They have a number to identify them in case you use more than one of that type in a given scenario. They have the abbreviation telling you what kind of ship it is, and the outline gives you the shape you can reference against the ship system display. So in advanced missions, what do we get? We get a bunch more Federation stuff. We have Federation police ships. We've got more frigates. We've got more light cruisers. We've got dreadnoughts, all kinds of stuff. Then we have a bunch of fighters, which is a new wrinkle for the Federation in this extension of the game. We have more Orion Pirates, some drones. We've got general units again, which can be used by any faction and are useful for scenarios. We've got a bunch more Klingons, the classic D7. So the original, as I understand it, the original version of Starfleet Battles was designed around the duel between a Federation cruiser and the Klingon D7 cruiser. And balancing that and making it intricate and fun and cool became then the basis for the whole system. So if you want a classic duel in this game, get yourself a Federation CA and a Klingon D7, and you'll have a great time. So we've got those guys. We've got, looks like, yeah, there's a carrier, a B-10 battleship, more destroyers, frigates, all kinds of stuff. Then we have some fighters, I think. Yep, and then, yeah, Z1, Z2 fighters. We've got some transport pods. Then for the Romulans, we got a bunch more stuff. They were a little bit shortchanged in the basic set, but there's a lot more here. I think the Romulans are more complex because they're using plasma torpedoes, which are a really interesting weapon, but more complex to use properly. And they also have cloaking devices, which are, you know, a little bit heavy rules load in the beginning. But here we have a bunch of cool stuff for the Romulans. Different Sparrowhawk. I think in those, are those Shadowhawks? I can't remember. But a bunch of different unique ship hulls for them. A lot more than in the basic set. Then we have more Tholians as well, so you can build more of those crazy webs to tie up your opponent. Then we have more Kizuntis. We've got some carriers with some more fighters and stuff. And here you can see the fighters actually here. Then we have some space dragon monsters. I think that's a sun snake, and I have no idea what that is. And then finally we have the Gorns, again, our friendly dinosaurs with some more battle cruisers, tugs, pods, dreadnoughts, all kinds of cool stuff. So again, huge amount of ships in here. If you combine this with the basic set, I mean, there's probably a decade's worth of duels in here if you really just wanted to delve in. Once again, gigantic rulebook. And yeah, I mean, I'll just give you an idea from the contents here. I mean, there is a lot going on. So they've extended the sequence of play to include all the new rules to make it easier for you. Then there's new rules for movement, so you can pre-plot your movement. Some more stuff about turning, tactical maneuvers, disengagement. There's some optional rules like the positron flywheel, which gives you some interesting maneuver possibilities. Then for combat, we've got more fire control options. We've got critical hit options, Space Marine boarding parties, Aegis fire control, all kinds of cool stuff. Then we've got more direct fire weapons. These are weapons that don't travel across the map. They just hit instantly. That includes, we have weapons here from other player races like the Hydrants, which are an invention of the Starfleet Battles universe. They're not from Star Trek. And then we got all the cool stuff that the Tholians can do and their enemies. Saltorians, so the Tholians use the webcaster to throw web around the map. Got many more seeking weapons, many more drones, lots of plasma torpedoes stuff, new power systems, new shuttlecraft with warp booster packs, administrative shuttles, new fighters, heavy fighters, all kinds of things. There's just so much to do in this game. But yeah, I think if you devour all of the basic set, then the advanced missions is the clear way to go. There's just, you know, this really starts to bring you up to the level where you have a sophisticated understanding of the game system. You can think about, you know, starting to play in tournaments and stuff like that. You really need to know these rules to get in there. And bear in mind as well, a lot of this rulebook, like from the middle onwards, is ship descriptions. So you need those to really understand your options with different ships. So for example, we have up here the Stasis Battlecruiser. This description will tell you, you know, some rules references you need to know to fly it. If there's some refits that you can do that give it different capabilities. You know, if there's any special add-ons like here, the UIM, which is like a targeting system. And it tells you where to find the ship display and the counter. So the ship description is really useful, and there are just absolute loads of them. And then there's scenarios. And then we have reference material at the end. So, you know, all these annexes, like where to find all the information you need about everything from tiny shuttles all the way up to all the big ships. And then everything that's in this product is summarized in this table at the back here. Yeah, so I know it's all pretty overwhelming, and yeah, it is. But again, insane value here. So this SSD book was updated in 2014, which is why I rebought this title as well, even though I own, I think, at least 2 copies of this already. But they did update the SSDs in a pretty significant way. And there's loads of cool ships in this box, right? So we have, again, general units, you can see there. So things like transports, planetary defense systems, freighters, bases, all that kind of stuff. Monitors, which are kind of defensive starships to defend systems. Then you've got loads of stuff for the Federation, police cutters, light cruisers, minesweepers, commando cruisers to invade planets, just all kinds of things, minesweepers. Then we have Klingons get loads of great stuff in this box, so it's a really good one to have if you're a Klingon player. In particular, the B-10 Battleship is just gigantic and very, very cool. You have Stasis Cruisers. These ships can freeze enemy ships in space-time, which is very risky, but pays off pretty well if you can pull it off. Then we've got loads of Romulans, really fills out the basic set in that respect. Then we got some Kizuntis, Gorns, and a bunch of Tholians, and this time we have 6 Orions instead of just 1. So again, I'm not going to subject you to all of these kind of overwhelming details of every ship. We'll be here for hours, but let's see what's an iconic one I can show you. Maybe the Battleship. I think it's around page 60. Yeah, here we go. Well, this is a Battleship. As you can see, it really takes up a lot more of the page. There's a lot more system boxes on here. And then it also comes with a bunch of fighters. So these can be launched. They have their own weapon system. So here you can see... these are actually the refits. So there's different versions of the B-10 Battleship that have slightly different capabilities and tells you how those work. So we have 2 kinds of fighters available. This is the YE and the YC. They have 2 phaser 3s on them. And they also, these little icons here show you that they have chaff, which they can launch to avoid missiles. And then they have missiles of their own as well. Then we have so many weapons on this thing. It's just bristling with firepower. We've got 8 drone racks, so we can fire from 8 different missile launchers. We've got Type 1, 2, and 3 phasers. And then we've got tons of disruptors. We've got anti-drones to block enemy missiles. You can see an absolute load of crew units and boarding parties. So it's a really monstrous machine. But it actually turns more like a Federation ship because it's so gigantic. So at 30 plus speeds, turn mode drops to 7. But yeah, this is a very iconic ship. There's actually some few videos just about this ship on YouTube that I've seen. It's kind of famous in Starfleet battles. And in fact, all the empires that are available in the game have some battleships, but some of them are called conjectural units. In other words, they weren't considered real in the game system, but you can still play them in scenarios and stuff. Oh, and here we have a Mauler. I mentioned these briefly before. So these, you can see these arrows here. They can suck up all your warp and battery power. They have tons of batteries. And then they fire in this pattern here or this pattern here. And whatever is in their path just gets a huge amount of damage. They're hard to use properly. They require incredible timing. And ships will be moving all the time, so it's tough to catch them. But when you're fighting against bases or slower ships, they are absolute powerhouses. Then we have some Romulans here. And then we've got, lots of Romulans. Some Kizuntis. Transports. A whole page of fighters for your reference. And then we've got our friends, the Gorns here, with heavy destroyers and whatnot. So yeah, this would be my recommendation for the second step. After you've mastered the basic set, jump in, get yourself advanced missions, and just go ham. There's just so much cool stuff you can do with these 2 rule books at your disposal and this huge array of ships. I mean, between these 2 products here, you're already at more than 200 ships, I believe. That, of course, can provide you with a huge amount of playtime, tons and tons of different scenarios, dozens of them, in fact. So really great value. And basic set, is nice and affordable. Will give you an idea whether you want to take that further step. So that's a nice way to go. So what do you want to do after that? Well, I would say if somebody said to me, what is the core set of modules for the Starfleet battle system, I would say It's these two guys, of course, and then these three modules here, which are modules C1, C2, and C3. These include new empires that are kind of exclusive to the Starfleet Battles universe. So they took their license, which has a limited amount of stuff they can use from Starfleet or Star Trek original series, and the animated series, and the Starfleet technical manuals that were published back in the 70s. Okay, but they were able to extend that and add their own empires and their own history, and so it's kind of spun off into the Starfleet universe. It's called, and you have all these different races. Now, they may not be to everybody's taste in terms of how they play, and of course they're not based in Star Trek, so if that's your main attraction, they're not really relevant to you. But I recommend checking these empires out because they offer really interesting new playstyles. Okay, so for example, in C1, we can see three different empires here. We have the Lyrans, we have the Hydrons, and we have the WYN. They all have a different way of playing. So the Lyrans, they're basically cat people. They use something called the expanding sphere generator, which kind of blows up around their ship and can block incoming damage. Can be used as a ram to slam into other ships, even several at the same time. You can use it to blow up a bunch of missiles at the same time. It's a really flexible and versatile weapon. The Hydrons are weird-looking guys with 3 legs, and they are known for using fighters. So they have really, really good fighters called Stingers that have a ton of different options. They move quickly. They have strong Gatling phaser guns. They can fire 4 times in a turn. They're not powerful, but they fire a lot, so they can do a lot of damage. They also have unique weapons called fusion beams, which are like an H-bomb focused into a beam weapon, and the Hellbore, which is designed to kind of envelop an enemy ship and crunch through their weakest shields. A really cool weapon. WYN are kind of an oddball group. They live in a dense kind of radiation zone in this Starfleet universe. So they have quite tough little ships that are built to survive those kind of environments. So yeah, so even just with this one module, you can see there's quite some cool stuff going on. There's, of course, new rules, but it's actually not so bad because these are just mainly ship descriptions. And then you have some new rules for the new weapons, right? So, yeah, there's some stuff here about how to fire the different new stuff, but really, it's basically ship descriptions in here. You've got a few counters for these new empires. So the green guys are the Hydrons. You can see a few different their ships here, and then some shuttles and a whole bunch of fighters, which you'll definitely need if you're using them. You've got the Lyrans here, so they've got some pretty cool multicolored ships. And there's a few fighters, but not so many as for the Hydrons. And then the WYN, they have some kind of freighter-type auxiliary units and a few different fighting ships. They don't use fighters so much, so they just have some shuttles down here. And then we have our book of ships that were more than enough to get you started with the unique play styles of the different empires. I'm in particular a fan of the Hydrons. I think... I'm not a super fan of using fighters with, say, the Federation, but to have a new race that really focuses on fighters, I think is pretty cool because it gives them a very different fighting style. So let's see. I'll skip past some of the generic stuff. Yeah, so here's a Hydrant Ranger, very classic cruiser, pretty tough for its size. You can see here these funny-looking boxes. You don't see those on other ships yet. These are where the fighters kind of dock, okay? So they're where they're stored in their hangar bays. And these are the Stinger fighters, which have their Gatling phasers. You can see it's called Phaser G. And then they have these 4 dots, some of them, which represents, like, they have a certain number of fusion beam charges they can fire. So they can be really damaging, these guys. And then we have the new weapons that the Hydrons use. Here we have fusions and overloaded fusion beams. And the fighters can also use a smaller version of the Hellbore weapon. I think, is there a Hellbore armed ship in here somewhere? Must be. It's been a while since I looked at this particular book. We've got lots of fusions. And yeah, here's a Hellbore. So yeah, the Hellbore pumps out quite a lot of damage if you overload it. So they're very fearsome weapons. They don't do so well beyond 8 hexes, right? It's just they don't do any damage beyond that. But up close, a Hydrant's going to pump you full of powerful hellbore beams, fusion beams, and just a swarm of fighters. And I find that really fun, and it's an interesting challenge to fight against as well. Then you have the Lyrans with their expanding sphere. They can, depending on how much energy you put into that weapon, it can make a bigger sphere that does different amounts of damage. And if you get rammed by one of these, it can really mess you up. And they're really useful for clearing away things like shuttles and drones, as I mentioned. So a really cool weapon to use, and really kind of a different playstyle emerges when you use them. The WIN I'm really unfamiliar with, to be honest, because I don't use them. They kind of tend to use this kind of hodgepodge of different ships. They're like the Orion Pirates in that they can use optional weapons that they've sort of cobbled together from captured ships and so forth. So that's kind of cool. I mean, there's a lot of flexibility there, but to me, they don't have as much identity as some of the other empires. I don't know much about them for that reason. They don't stick in my head so much, but yeah, so that's C1. Then you have C2. So this one was updated quite recently in 2017. And here we have the Saltorians. These are the enemies of the Tholians. So in the Starfleet Battles universe, the Tholians controlled their galaxy that they originally came from, and then the Saltorians kind of rebelled and blew up all their cool stuff. And they have weapons specialized to destroy Tholian webs and to break through shields. Then you have the Andromedans, who invaded from another galaxy, and they fly these kind of UFO-looking things. They have really weird and cool weapons. They do things like they can teleport their entire ships around the map to like huge distances. They can even teleport other ships. So if you're really lucky, as an Andromedan, you can teleport an enemy inside of a planet and they instantly die. It's very hard to do that successfully, but it does happen. Then you have some more ships for the WIN and for the Lyrans as well, and tons of scenarios as usual. So the C2, or this is C3 actually. Sorry, I've jumped ahead a little bit here. But yeah, there's just an absolute ton of content in all these bits. The rulebook for this one is a bit chunkier. I think because we have some actual more rules content for the new weapons. And then we're into ship descriptions again. Then these have nice updated counters. We've got all of our Saltorians here. They have this kind of characteristic double-pronged hull design. Smaller ones just have one, but the larger ships you'll use will have this double design. They have these patrol ships, PFs. They have some light cruisers down here. Then we have some ships for the LDR. They're a breakaway republic of the Lyrans. They're kind of like North and South Korea, basically. So they're like North Korea, I think. Then we have WIN with some new stuff. We've got some special counters here, which I think are for a future product. They're not actually for this product, but they had room on the counter sheet. So there's going to be a Civil Wars module where you can play like Kizuntis versus Kizuntis and stuff. We've got some more Romulans. We've got some Tholian guys. There's our Andromedans in their UFO-looking powerhouse ships. And some utility counters for some of their very odd weapons. These are for the temporal elevator. Then we have the Juggernauts. These are kind of mysterious extragalactic monstrosities. Some more LDR ships. Yeah, so again, really just a load of cool stuff in the module. And tons of ships. I'll just see, we'll look at one or two here. So in this module we have, how many? Yeah, well, it looks like about 80 ships in here. So that's not bad. So we got Neo-Tholians. They're kind of upgraded Tholian units. Andromedans, Saltorians, and Lyran Democratic Republic. Let's look at a couple of Andromedans and a Saltorian. Yeah, that sounds good. All right. So I'll try and find a cool Andromedan. Here, okay, how about this? An Andromedan Exploiter. So they have this unique shape. You'll notice there's no shields around them, and that's because they use something really cool called a power absorber panel. They absorb incoming damage and turn it into energy, which you can then store in the ship's batteries, of which they have a number of those. But the way you bust through an Andromedan's defenses is you have to overload those power panels, and they kind of the Andromedan has to be able to vent that energy somewhere, otherwise it blows up the ship. So they have a tendency to fly around and absorb damage really well and seem to be fine, and then they suddenly explode. So quite interesting to fly. They use a heavy weapon called a tractor repulsor beam, which is conceptually like a tractor beam that shakes enemy ships apart. So that's pretty cool. And then they have the displacement device, which allows them to warp themselves or other ships over quite long distances. You can see up to 50 hexes there. So the Andromedans are really interesting and fun to fly, and they really suit well as an invading extragalactic enemy, because they have all this weird stuff they can do. And we'll look for some Saltorians somewhere. Where are they? There we go. Here we go. So here's a Saltorian scout destroyer, that double-pronged design. Scout ships in this game have some cool extra powers. They have these special sensors here, and they have all these extra functions they can do. So they can perform electronic warfare, they can break enemy lock-ons, they can attract enemy missiles, drones toward themselves, they can control extra missiles in flight, they can detect mines, they can do all sorts of cool stuff. So in a fleet battle, it's really useful to have a scout. But they tend to be good targets as well. So that's a quick look at C3, which is actually one of my favorite expansions, in that I really like the Andromedans. Not everybody does, but I think the Andromedans are really cool. I really love the creativity that went into their weapons, and there's an interesting in-game history around them. So here's New Worlds 2, which I thought I was showing you a minute ago, but I was not. And here we have more Andromedans. This is actually where they're introduced in the game system, and then they're extended in C3. We have the ISC, the Interstellar Concordium. They have a really cool weapon called the Plasmatic Pulsar device, which does damage to multiple shields at once in like several pulses, so it's pretty cool. And then the Neotholians, which also have a few ships in C3 as well. Yeah, so I'm really getting up in time here, so I'll try not to go too much longer with this. But again, we have another rulebook, tons of scenarios. We have some stuff about ISC fighters and things in here. Lots of top-down diagrams for ship recognition purposes. Again, the C module rulebooks are not so bad. I wouldn't really worry about the details of those. If you've been able to absorb these rulebooks, these are no problem. And then we have a smaller arrangement of counters in here, but still plenty of ships to play with. So we've got our Neotholians, we've got some Paravians, which are a unique race, again, created for this universe. Loads of Andromedan stuff, including a very scary starbase. We've got some big destructive battleship type things, and then there's satellite ships, which can be stored inside the larger motherships. Then we have the ISC. I really like the counters for these, this blue and yellow design. These ships are designed to fly in very tightly coordinated fleets that have very particular arrangements of weapons and stuff. They call that the echelon formation. They're really interesting to fly. I really like the ISC, and they use a combination of their plasmatic pulsar device and plasma torpedoes, which tend to fire out the rear to prevent people chasing them. Then we have some Lyrans, some general units, freighters basically, and some Kizuntis. And then in the SSD book, again, I think we probably got, oh look, 48 ships in here, so not too bad. Yeah, and there's a bunch of, most of this is Andromedans and ISC. So you've seen the Andromedans, and I'll show you ISC Dreadnought. How does that sound? Just get a look at what they look like. Here we go. That's an ISC Dreadnought, big, powerful ship. We have the Plasmatic Pulsar device, PPD. We've got 3 of those in the front of the ship, which is a lot of firepower, plus 4 phaser 1s over here, 2 here, and 2 here. A bunch of phaser 3s on the sides to blow up incoming missiles or fighters. Then we've got Plasma F launchers, which fire out to the sides and to the rear. There are different sizes of plasma torpedoes, and the F is one of the smaller ones, but they can still do 20 damage if you get one in the face. So it's not great if you're on the receiving end. Then you have the PPDs, plasmatic pulsar devices, which do this splash damage around multiple shields. I really enjoy flying the ISC, one of my favorite races in the game. So if you like sort of coordinated fleet tactics, they're the ones for you. Very, very cool. All right, so that gives you an idea of the core of the gaming system, basically. I would say if you get basic and advanced and C1, C2, C3, I mean, it's a ridiculous amount of content, but you will have so much variety of cool stuff to fly. And from there, you can jump into anything else in the game system because you're then familiar with all the main races. From there, you can add more details with stuff like this module about fighters. You can add Marines, which adds a huge amount of detail to ground combat, combat within ships. And then the R modules are basically, once you know the rules from these guys, the R modules are where you get big selections of new ships. that tend to go around a theme. So R2, 3, and 4, which I have here, are adding essential units to the main empires in the game. So those are a really straightforward step after you've mastered C1, C2, C3. Get some more ships for yourself for all the main empires in these 3 guys, and you'll be good for even more years of gameplay. So, wow, that was a long video. Thanks for sticking with me. That's Starfleet Battles. I think, I hope you get some idea of how the game plays. I know I didn't necessarily go in the most sensible order, but I tried to introduce what is ultimately a really complicated and deep game system. So feel free to ask questions in the comments, of course. If you'd like to see more about this game system, I'll talk about it anytime, any day of the week. And I will do a follow-up about Federation Commander, which will be, for those of you who are not really accustomed to complex games like this, that's a much easier way in. And they are really close. I mean, once you learn Federation Commander, it's not a huge conceptual leap to move up to Starfleet Battles. There's a lot more rules, but they're of a very similar character. So Federation Commander is a great way into the system, and it's perfectly viable to play in and of itself. It's plenty deep. It's really, really fun. So I will introduce you to that as well. But anyway, I hope some of you out there enjoyed that. I'm going to circulate this video around the Starfleet Battles community as well, and I hope it helps some people promote the game a little bit and get some people into it. I think my only complaint, as I said, is that the PDFs are just too expensive, honestly. It kind of puts up a barrier. A lot of other games like BattleTech is very similar in that you have a detailed tactical sci-fi game with these detailed record sheets for every unit. But for $10 in BattleTech, you can get over 400 record sheets for 400 different units. You don't get prices anything like as good for Starfleet. And that's a shame, because I think that does put off people who are not ready to invest a huge amount right away. However, there is a lot of cool free stuff on the ADB website you can find to get you started. There's the Cadet introductory system for Starfleet Battles that's completely free as well. So they do provide great value in their own way. And the physical products in particular, as you've seen, I mean, each of these products is, these modules here, I mean, most of them are like around 20 pounds or even less. But there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of content in here. But the digital offering is a little bit stingy for my taste. I think they should, relax the pricing. A lot of companies have realized that if you offer a PDF for 30% of the price of the physical product, then you'll move more of those PDFs. And I bought a lot of the PDFs because I love the system, and that's just I'm a sucker for that. But for new players, I think, I hope this will be helpful, because first of all, you know what physical products to get. And then when you want to get your shipbooks in PDF form, you can, kind of focus down and just get the ones you really need, save yourself some money. So yeah, that's it for now. Look forward to seeing you again in some more videos, some of which will be, of course, Twisty Puzzles again. But I do want to do a couple more about some of my favorite games as well, because it's something I do a lot for my social time and my spare time. So let me know what you think in the comments. Do give the game a try if you're not too scared of the rulebook, and happy to answer any questions in the comments if you're on the edge and can't decide whether to give it a go. So until the next video, everybody take care, stay safe out there, and see you next time. All right, bye-bye.